This is something that gets me really excited. It's a box of fasteners. This might be really boring. $109 of nuts and bolts and washers. But the reason that I'm excited about this is because it's symbolic of our approach to this vehicle versus what would be just a traditional restoration. So part of, this work is fun, right? Working with your hands is really satisfying. And one of the things you might do in a restoration is take all the original nuts and bolts and clean the rust off and replate them and reuse them. It's quite a satisfying experience. But the problem with that is we have to think about not just cost of parts, but time. And when you can buy all the nuts and bolts that you need to reassemble the whole car for $100, it doesn't make sense to spend hours cleaning and replating all the original fasteners that are all of different sizes, different strengths, where we can go and get modern nuts and bolts that do the job, in some cases much better, and do it cheaper. The other thing we can do is start to standardize and minimize the amount of fasteners we need. Some of the ways that this was put together are about optimizing process of trying to spit out tens, hundreds of cars a day in a factory line. We have the luxury of a little bit more time in that assembly. We don't need to do everything as a car's moving down a conveyor belt. So we can take the time to, put a bolt on the end of a nut rather than have to just use a screw because it's quicker. So the other thing is that these can all be metric. And a big part of that is also that these need to feel right. So we've taken an approach where we kind of have, I'm trying to find one of these nuts or bolts for you, but is that it's almost like a concept of interior and exterior. So these are, 60s, 70s retro vehicles. So they knew, and part of their charm is their utilitarian nature and the exposed nuts and bolts and rivets and all these things. So essentially treating exterior, at a broader sense, exterior facing things with a normal hex head, a classic bolt, right? But then the thing is that with an interior that is mostly sheet metal and again, exposed nuts and bolts, they need to feel right. Like you're gonna go to the beach, you're gonna get in this with bare feet, you're touching it, there is sharp bits of metal and hard surfaces everywhere. So how do we make that the nicest that it can be? And one of those ways is by using a button head bolt. So you can see it's got like a nice soft profile. Now, in some cases in the car, that was what they originally used, but because these kind of fasteners weren't really available, you didn't have an ability to have an Allen key head. They were often like a flathead screw or a Phillips head screw, which if ever you've tried to take out an old flathead screw, it's a nightmare of a fastener to put in. So we can we can use power tools with this Allen key, but it gives a nice surface for your hand, your foot, your leg, whatever. And there is a lot of places that your human skin, fragile human skin, will touch could touch sharp edges of metal. So this is such a tiny little thing, but to me, it's one of the most important things that we make sure that this looks right, but also feels right. And that's not just sort of an emotional sense of feeling, but really the touch of it all needs to be right. And we can basically standardize the assembly of the whole car, so the body onto the chassis, with about 3 different kinds of bolts, as in 3 different bolts of a certain length. So it makes the manual that we're creating, the specs, really easy. You need to replace this is gone. There is only 2 standard bolts you need to work to assemble the body of a jaunt Land Rover and put it back together.